Alien woman was thrown into a filthy well to die. She cried for help, but only one human answered. The lower districts of Akara, 9 always smelled of water and metal. Elvis Voss had learned to live with it. He was a botanical surveyor stationed here to monitor hydroponic outflows and check that nutrient mixes didn't sour. He had been doing this work for 3 years, since leaving service as a scout medic. He liked the structure of it: charts, readings, schedules, things that stayed steady. On this shift, his route took him along a catwalk suspended over runoff channels. Pipes ran along both walls, dripping condensation into dark water below. Elvis carried his field pack slung on one shoulder, logging data into a slate as he walked. His mind was on calibration errors he needed to correct back at his unit. That was when he heard the cry. It was faint at first, echo bouncing off the stone shaft of an old maintenance well. The sound didn't fit this place. It was a machine noise. It was a human voice, raw with panic. He stopped, scanned the shadows, then leaned over the grate. A voice came again, sharper this time. "Help, please." He clipped his slate back to his belt and switched on his headlamp. The beam cut down into the shaft. At the bottom, 20 feet down, a woman clung to the slick wall. Her skin was green, shining wet under the light. Braided black hair clung to her shoulders, weighed down by runoff. Torn ceremonial silks clung to her body in tatters. The crimson fabric soaked through and clinging to her ribs and thighs. She looked exhausted, her fingers white on a rusted rung. Elvis's chest tightened. This wasn't an accident. No one climbed down here on their own. He recognized the silks. He had seen them once before, during a ritual procession near the Enclave Quarter. Someone had thrown her down here. Her eyes locked on his light, wide and glassy. "Don't leave me," she said, voice hoarse. He didn't. He dropped his pack to the grate and pulled a coil of nylon rope from his side pocket. His training took over. Anchor, test, descend. His hands worked fast. No hesitation, but his thoughts kept pace. Whoever did this didn't expect her to come out alive. He would not leave her. "I'm coming down," he said, voice even. "Stay where you are. Hold tight." She flinched at his tone, as if bracing for a blow. In her hand, she clutched a shard of broken tile, edges jagged. She raised it to her throat. "Back away," she rasped. He froze mid-motion. "I'm not here to hurt you. You from the Enclave?" "No." "Prove it." He pulled the field knife from his belt and dropped it into the shaft. The splash echoed. He lifted his empty palms. She blinked at the knife sinking, then back at him. Her grip on the shard trembled. He slid into the harness and lowered himself. Boots scraped against damp stone. When he reached her level, she looked worse up close. Cuts across her arms, dirt embedded in her skin, a bruise along her jaw. Her lips were split. She trembled, but her chin stayed raised. "I'm Elvis Voss," he said quietly. "Surveyor. Medic before that." He kept his voice steady, his hands slow. "I'm going to put this loop under your arms. You'll feel me touch your side. That's all." She gave a small nod. He slid the rope around her ribs, careful with the bruises, careful not to crowd her. Her skin was ice cold. He felt her stiffen when his knuckles brushed her cut. He waited until she breathed again. "Ready?" he asked. "Just lift me. You'll climb with me. Together." She shut her eyes, gave the faintest nod. He hauled the rope, pushed against the wall, and they rose inch by inch. Water dripped onto his neck. The rung groaned under his boots. She clung to him, face pressed against his chest, breath harsh against his shirt. Halfway up, her grip faltered. The tile shard slipped from her hand, dropped, and shattered on stone below. She gasped, fingers clawing his coat. He locked the rope with his harness, braced, and let her recover. "Look at the light," he said. "Not the wall." Her breath steadied. She nodded against him. At the rim, he hooked an arm over the grate and hauled them both out with one final pull. She collapsed on the metal, coughing until the sound broke. He stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The silks underneath clung to her body, ruined and humiliating. He tried not to stare, but his gut reacted anyway. He forced his focus to her pulse, her skin temperature, her shivering. "What's your name?" he asked. "Arian." Her voice cracked on the word, but her eyes stayed defiant. "Can you walk?" "Yes." She tried and failed. He slid an arm under her knees and lifted her. She weighed less than he expected. She gripped his shirt tight, hiding her face against his throat as if the light hurt. He adjusted his hold and carried her off the catwalk. The corridors back to his unit were quiet. Pipes hissed. Pumps throbbed in the walls. Above, the city hummed with filtered air and fountains that people like him never saw. Elvis kept his stride even, his jaw set. Whoever had thrown her down here had made her their problem. Now she was his. Inside his habitat, he keyed the door shut and set her on the bench. Warm air met them. Rows of hydroponic trays glowed faintly. The air smelled green, sharp with mint. He filled the basin with hot water, dropped a leaf inside, laid towels out. The smell cut through the stink of a shaft. Arian sat rigid, his coat around her, eyes darting around the room. 2 mugs. A bunk, a single chair. She pulled the coat tighter when the torn sash slipped. Her hands trembled once, then stopped. "I need to clean your cuts," he said. "You can say no." Her gaze fixed on his hands. She hesitated, then nodded. He knelt with a cloth and began to work, steady and silent. He rinsed grit from her skin, taped a gash, unwound tangles in her braids. She flinched, but didn't stop him. He didn't pretend not to see the way her body showed through the ruined silk. He just chose where to look. "You're not asking why I was down there," she said, watching him. "No, you don't want to know. If you want to tell me, you will." Her jaw tightened. Her eyes stayed on his. "They call me impure. I refused to bond. They threw me in." He pressed the last pad into place. His stomach knotted, but his face didn't move. He folded the cloth, set it aside, and pulled an oversized thermal shirt from the locker. He turned away, gave her privacy, busied himself with the plant gauges. "Okay," she said after a moment. He turned back. The shirt swallowed her frame, sleeves too long, hem at her thighs. The ruined sash lay folded beside her. She sat straighter now, shoulders squared despite the tremor in her hands. "You don't owe me," he said. Her mouth curved into a hard line. "Nobody does this without wanting something." "I do." She looked at him for a long moment, then lowered her eyes to the steaming mug he set in front of her. Her hands wrapped around it. She drank slow. Elvis leaned back against the counter. He had gone out tonight to read nutrient gauges and file reports. Instead, he had pulled a condemned woman out of a well. He felt the weight of it in his chest. He didn't know yet if he had saved her life or changed his own. The heater hummed softly, filling the small unit with a steady warmth that dulled the damp chill clinging to Arian's skin. Elvis moved through the space with quiet precision, setting tools back on their hooks, rinsing the basin, and making sure the water lines in the hydroponic trays didn't overflow. He didn't hover, but he didn't leave her unattended either. He watched her from the corner of his vision, enough to read the way she clutched his coat tighter around her shoulders, enough to notice when her gaze drifted to the door like she might bolt. She hadn't touched the bread he had set by her mug, only the soup. He noted it, but said nothing, giving her control over what she took. He also noticed the questions in her eyes. He had seen that look before, patience in field camps, waiting for him to explain what came next. "You're wondering why I'm here," he said, finally breaking the silence. Her eyes flicked up at him, wary. "Yes, men don't live in these lower units unless they've been sent here, where they're hiding. I survey plant systems. I check flows, report nutrient balance, stop mold before it kills half the racks. It's work most don't want, so they send men like me." Her brow furrowed. "So you're not cast out?" "No, I left service years ago. Took this assignment because it's quiet." She processed that in silence, her amber eyes narrowing slightly as if searching for lies. When she found none, she exhaled, her shoulders easing just a fraction. "What about you?" he asked. He didn't push, but he gave her the space to answer if she wanted. Arian's lips pressed together, then parted slowly. "I was supposed to bond to a council elder. They said it was my duty, my gift to the Enclave. I said no." Her jaw tightened as the words came. "Refusing makes you impure. A stain. They decided stains should be erased." The last word hung in the room. Elvis felt his stomach clench. He didn't tell her she was wrong or that her people were cruel. She already knew that. He poured fresh water in her mug instead, a small, ordinary act that meant she wasn't erased here. She studied him, testing. You didn't ask if I deserved it. I don't care if you did, he said simply. You're alive. That's enough. Her mouth twitched like she didn't know whether to laugh or spit. In the end, she said nothing. She sipped the water, hiding behind the mug. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft trickle of nutrient lines. Elvis leaned against the counter, arms folded, eyes on her, but not intruding. His own mind wasn't calm. He kept replaying the descent into the well, her trembling grip on the shard, the way her body had felt against his chest, cold, fragile, but clinging to life with stubborn force. He told himself he was a medic first, that his reaction was instinct, but he knew better. He had felt the heat rise when her silks clung to her body, and it bothered him. Not the wanting itself, but that he wanted it all when she was broken and afraid. You're safe here tonight, he said, breaking the silence again. No one comes down this corridor unless something's broken. They don't even know this unit is mine. Her expression shifted, uncertain. And if they did, then they'd have to deal with me. He said it without bravado, as if it were just a fact, and something in the way he said it made her eyes linger on him longer than before. She pulled the coat tighter around herself and stared at the folded sash lying beside her. These clothes, she said, voice low, they were meant to make me desirable, and now they're just filth. Then burn them, he said, or keep them, if you want to remember why you walked away. She looked at him sharply, caught off guard. No one had given her the choice before. For the first time, her expression softened, though only slightly. You didn't answer me, she said after a beat. Why did you help me? Most men would have kept walking. Elvis pushed off the counter and crouched in front of her so she couldn't avoid his eyes. Because I heard you call, and because leaving you, there wasn't an option I was willing to live with. Her breath caught, just enough for him to notice. She turned her head quickly, eyes on the floor. He didn't press. He stood, collected the empty bowl and mug, and washed them without a word. She sat very still, her fingers brushing the edge of the bench where the ruined silks lay. When he finished, he dragged a chair near the heater and set a folded blanket on the floor beside it. You take the bunk, he said. And you. Chair's fine. Her lips pressed tight, but she didn't argue. She moved toward the bunk, her steps unsteady. She climbed under the blanket without looking at him. For a while, only the soft hum of pumps and the patter of rain against the small window filled the room. Elvis sat with his arms folded, eyes half shut, listening for her breath to steady. Minutes later, her voice broke the dark. Elvis. Yeah, if I fall asleep, will you still be here when I wake up? Yes. There was no hesitation, no explanation, no condition attached. Just one word, solid. She was silent after that, and soon her breathing fell into rhythm. Elvis leaned his head back against the chair, watching the shadowed outline of her form under the blanket. He felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper in his chest, heavier than his pack, heavier than anything he had carried since the war. He told himself this was temporary. One night, but the way she had said his name, the way her voice cracked with something closer to fear than anger, made him wonder if he was lying to himself. Rain tapped against the narrow window through the night, a faint rhythm that kept Elvis half awake in the chair. He had learned years ago how to rest in short intervals, how to listen for a change in breathing, for a shift in weight on a bunk, for the scrape of movement in the dark. When Arian stirred, he opened his eyes just enough to see her shape under the blanket. She wasn't crying, but her body trembled like the memory of the well had followed her into sleep. By morning, the air inside the unit felt warmer, more lived in. The heater had worked all night, softening the damp air that always crept in from the lower lanes. Elvis stood and stretched his shoulders, then set water to boil. He hadn't eaten since before the survey run, and he figured she hadn't eaten properly in days. He pulled out root flour cakes from storage, reheated them in the small pan, and mixed dried herbs into the broth he had left. The scent spread through the room. Arian sat up slowly, the blanket sliding down her shoulders. The oversized shirt he had given her was twisted from sleep, hanging loose, bearing one thigh. She pulled it lower when she noticed his eyes flick there for a second. He didn't apologize. He just turned to the stove and stirred the pot. "You didn't sleep," she said, voice rough. "I slept enough," he replied. "I've gone longer." She studied him. "Soldier." "Medic," he corrected. "Scouts needed patching up. That was my job. Why aren't you still one?" He placed the cakes on the table and set a bowl of broth beside them. "Because I got tired of watching people break. Plants don't bleed. They just tell you when something's off, and you fix it." That answer seemed to register with her. She shifted on the bunk, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Do you ever regret leaving?" "No," he said without pause. "I regret not leaving sooner." She dipped her eyes to the bowl he slid in front of her. For the first time, she ate without hesitation, tearing the cakes into small pieces and soaking them in the broth. He took his own bowl and sat across from her, elbows resting on the table. When she was halfway through, she asked the question that had been building since the night before. "What happens to me now?" He knew she would ask. He had asked himself the same thing as he watched her sleep. "That depends on you," he said. "You can stay here until you're strong enough to decide what you want. Or you can leave now, if that's what you prefer." Her face tightened. "If I go back, they'll throw me in again. Or worse." "Then don't go back." "It isn't that simple." "It can be," he said calmly, his eyes steady on hers. "No one up there cares what happens in the underlayers. They don't come down. If you stay, you're invisible to them." Her spoon stopped midair. "You want me to hide here? Like I'm some shameful thing you found?" "That's not what I said," he replied. His voice was firm but even. "I said you can stay here if you choose. The choice matters more than anything they tried to take from you." Her jaw worked, but she didn't answer. She lowered the spoon and pushed the bowl aside, her appetite gone. She sat back, staring at the hydroponic racks against the wall, the way the roots floated in the thin stream of water. She seemed to be weighing her options like they were pieces of broken fabric in her lap. Elvis decided to address another question she hadn't asked yet, but clearly carried in her eyes. "No one here knows you're with me. No one will unless you walk out into the lanes with me. And if you do, they'll look, but they won't act. People mind their own." She turned her eyes to him, sharp. "And what if someone from my enclave sees me? What if word spreads?" "Then we deal with it when it comes," he said. He didn't flinch under her stare. "But right now, you need food, rest, and clean clothes. One step at a time." Her shoulders dropped slightly, the tension in them easing. She nodded once, as if conceding the point for now. After they finished eating, Elvis gathered the ruined silks and set them aside. "These, do you want to keep them?" Arian stared at the tattered fabric. The gold trim still caught the light, though dulled by grime. Her throat worked before she answered. "Not like this." He fetched a small container and folded the silks carefully into it, not treating them like trash, but like something that could wait for her decision later. She noticed the care he used. It softened her expression in a way he hadn't seen before. By mid-shift, she asked another question, quieter this time. "Why didn't you ask for anything from me? Not credits, not anything else." Elvis leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Because I didn't help you to get paid. You cried for help. I answered. That's it." Her eyes searched his face, skeptical but also curious. "Men don't work like that where I'm from." "Maybe that's why you're here," he said. She absorbed that, her mouth pressed tight, but her eyes flicked to the coat still around her shoulders, then to the steaming mugs he'd refilled. Something shifted in her expression, a mix of distrust, relief, and something else she hadn't decided on yet. The silence held, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It felt like the first stretch of air after being pulled from water. She pulled the blanket tighter, leaned back against the wall, and finally let her eyes close for real rest. Elvis watched her settle. He returned to his survey notes, logging readings from the night before, but his mind wasn't on the numbers. He thought about the rope, the well, and the fact that his routine had ended the moment he heard her cry. He wondered if there was any turning back from that. The unit was quiet except for the steady hum of the pumps and the faint trickle of water through the hydroponic trays. Arian slept for a long stretch, longer than Elvis had expected. He kept busy with his work, calibrating pH strips, logging readings, adjusting nutrient mixes. But every time he glanced back at the bunk, he noted the rise and fall of her chest, slower and steadier than the night before. Her body was finally letting go of the fight. When she woke, The room carried the smell of reheated broth and fresh root cakes. Elvis had set a second bowl on the table, this time with a slice of preserved fruit on the side. She sat up slowly, blinking against the light. Her braids hung loose and heavy, strands falling across her face. She pulled his coat tighter before speaking. "You watch me while I sleep?" she asked, her voice rough. "Only enough to make sure you were breathing," he said without hesitation. Her expression shifted. She was testing him, waiting for a crack, some hint of hidden motive. When she didn't find one, she slid from the bunk and joined him at the table. She ate quietly, her eyes flicking between him and the racks of plants. "Why plants?" she asked finally. "Why not stay in the Medicorps?" Elvis sat back in the chair. "Because plants don't argue when you fix them. They don't hide what's broken. They just tell you in numbers, in color, in the way the leaves hang. You adjust, and they recover." Her brow furrowed. "So people are harder. They lie about what hurts. They hide the worst of it until it's too late. I got tired of that." He paused, considering whether to add more. Then he did. "I got tired of losing people." She studied him for a moment, spoon paused in her hand. "You lost someone." He didn't answer right away. "Several. Some I knew, some I didn't. But all of them stayed with me longer than I wanted." The silence stretched until she set her spoon down. "Then why did you pull me out? Weren't you afraid I'd just become another weight?" He met her eyes directly. "I thought about it. Then I decided carrying you was better than listening to you scream until you stopped." Her throat tightened at that, and she looked away, embarrassed by how much the words struck her. She fiddled with the edge of the coat, pulling it over her knees. After they finished eating, she leaned back against the wall and asked another question, one that had clearly been building since she first arrived. "You said no one comes down here, but what about supplies? Neighbors? Don't you ever have people knocking?" "Neighbors keep to themselves. Everyone down here wants the same thing, privacy. I get supplies delivered through the survey office. No one asks questions as long as the reports are filed on time. And if they see me, they'll look the other way. They always do." She studied him, skeptical. "You sound sure. I've lived here long enough to know." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she pulled at the hem of the shirt he had given her. "I can't stay in this forever." "I know," he said. "I'll find you clothes." She hesitated, then asked the question he had been expecting since the start. "Why are you helping me, really? If you don't want payment, if you don't want—" She stopped herself, the words catching. Elvis leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. His voice stayed calm, direct. "Because I don't like the way this city treats people like you. Because I can't stand the idea of walking away from someone when I could have done something. And because, whether you believe it or not, I don't want anything in return." Her eyes flicked up to his sharp, searching. This time, she didn't look away. She held the stare until something in her expression softened, almost reluctantly. "That doesn't exist where I'm from." "Then maybe it starts here," he said. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. She finally pulled the bowl closer again and finished the last of the broth. Later, when Elvis checked the gauges on the hydroponic racks, he caught her standing by the small window, staring at the rain sliding down the glass. Her reflection looked tired, but there was a trace of pride in her posture. "They'll come looking for me eventually," she said without turning. "Maybe," he admitted, "but they won't come down here. And if they do, they'll find me first." She turned then, studying him carefully as though weighing the truth of his words. Something in the set of her jaw told him she wanted to believe him, but wasn't ready to say it. When the lights dimmed to signal evening cycle, Elvis set a blanket on the bunk again. This time she didn't hesitate. She lay down and pulled it over herself, though her eyes stayed open for a while, watching him as he moved through his routine. Only when he settled back in the chair near the heater did her breathing finally slow. Elvis sat in silence, staring at the glow of the trays. He knew she still didn't trust him completely. He also knew she was beginning to test the edges of what safety could feel like. That, more than anything, told him she wasn't planning to walk away in the morning. Morning broke with the faint hum of the upper city bleeding through the concrete ceiling. An artificial dawn carried down through vents and pipes. Elvis had been awake for an hour already, writing notes on his survey slate, updating nutrient cycles, recalibrating the oxygen levels in the trays. He worked with the same calm efficiency as the night before, but his eyes kept drifting toward the bunk. Arian stirred under the blanket. She turned on her side, then sat up slowly, the oversized shirt falling unevenly around her thighs. Her hair was tangled, damp braids loosening into long strands across her shoulders. She caught Elvis watching her and pulled the fabric tighter. "You start your day early," she said, voice low but steadier than before. "Plants don't wait," he replied. He set the slate down and moved to the counter, pouring hot water into 2 mugs. He slid one toward her. "You'll feel better after this." She wrapped her hands around it, inhaling the steam before drinking. For the first time, her shoulders lowered without force. "You said yesterday you'd find clothes," she reminded him, looking down at the shirt. "I can't walk around like this forever." "I know." He opened the storage locker at the wall and pulled out spare work pants, patched but clean. "These won't fit right, but they'll do for now." She examined the folded fabric, then looked back at him. "You're not afraid someone will see me in your things and ask questions?" "No one here asks questions," he said. "That's how we all survive." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she took the pants and disappeared into the washroom. Elvis busied himself with slicing root vegetables, but he heard the quiet sound of fabric rustling. When she returned, the pants were loose, rolled twice at the waist, and the shirt hung just long enough to cover her frame. She looked uncomfortable, but cleaner, more grounded than the night before. "They'll know I'm not one of you," she said, tugging at the waistband. "They'll know," Elvis agreed. "But they won't stop us." Her eyes lifted sharply. "Us?" He shrugged. "You're not hiding in this room forever. If you want clothes, food, supplies, you need to come with me. It's safer if you're at my side." The word safer hung between them. For the first time, Arian didn't look away. She studied him, weighing whether his calm certainty was real or just another form of control. Her jaw tightened. "And if someone from the Enclave sees me, then you'll already be walking with me," he said. His voice was steady, almost matter-of-fact. "That changes the way they look at you." Her fingers traced the seam of the borrowed pants. She didn't answer right away, but the fact that she didn't refuse told him enough. After breakfast, Elvis handed her a comb and a set of hair ties he'd picked up from a vendor weeks ago. She frowned the small gift. "Why do you even have these?" "They were cheap," he said, "and I like order." She almost laughed, the sound sharp and unfamiliar. But she sat by the mirror and worked through the knots, braid by braid. Her reflection showed cuts along her jaw, bruises fading at her collarbone, but there was still defiance in the way she held her head. Elvis noticed it as he pulled on his survey coat and clipped the slate to his belt. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. Arian met his eyes in the mirror. "No," she admitted. Then she stood anyway, fastening the belt he gave her around the loose pants. "But I won't be weak here." They stepped out together into the corridor. The air smelled faintly of rust and damp stone. A maintenance worker passed, glanced at Arian once, then looked away, just as Elvis had promised. Still, her hand twitched close to his, fingers curling and uncurling, as if deciding whether to reach. He didn't take it, but he slowed his stride just enough to match hers. For Elvis, it was routine, a supply run, a check of gauges in the next sector. For Arian, every step felt like exposure. She scanned every doorway, every sign, waiting for a familiar face, for someone from her enclave to step out. None did. Only tired workers, heads down, walking past. The city above remained oblivious. At a small vendor stall, Elvis bought plain tunics and another pair of trousers. He didn't haggle, didn't explain. The shopkeeper's eyes flicked once toward Arian, then back to the counter. The exchange ended in silence. When they returned to the unit, Arian dropped the bundle of clothes onto the bunk. Her hands shook slightly as she unrolled them. "No one stopped us," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "They don't care," Elvis said. "That's the truth of this place. People only see what they want to." She sat on the edge of the bunk, staring at the folded tunic. For the first time, her eyes carried something other than fear or suspicion. There was relief there, uneasy, fragile, but real. Elvis leaned against the counter, watching her. He didn't press, didn't tell her what to feel. He only said, "You walked out. That's what matters." Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked at him for a long moment, then finally whispered, "I thought I'd never be able to again." The silence that followed was heavier than any explanation. It wasn't gratitude, not yet, but it was a shift, a step out of the well and into something that felt like living. The air inside the unit carried a different weight that evening. Arian sat on the bunk in her new clothes, the plain tunic and trousers making her look less like someone discarded from a ritual and more like a person with her own ground to stand on. She ran her fingers along the fabric, as if still unsure it was really hers. Elvis moved quietly around the space, adjusting gauges, rinsing tools, writing notes into his survey slate. He gave her room, but kept her within sight. When the work was done, he poured water into the kettle and set it to heat. The silence stretched between them until she finally broke it. "You didn't ask me why I said no," she said, eyes fixed on the floor. Elvis leaned against the counter, arms folded. "To the bond." She nodded, her hands clenching around the edge of the tunic. "I didn't ask," he said carefully, "because I don't need to judge your reasons. They're yours." Her head lifted, eyes sharp. "That's not how men are where I'm from. They think no is something to be corrected." He met her gaze without flinching. "Then I'm not like them." Her expression softened, but only slightly. She looked away, voice dropping lower. "If I had gone through with it, I'd be tied to a man twice my age, owned by his household. They would have called it honor. To me, it was a cage." Elvis felt his chest tighten, but he didn't let it show in his face. "Then you chose right." "Right cost me everything," she said, bitterness edging her tone. "Not everything," he said, calm but firm. "You're alive. You're free. That matters more than what they think." She studied him again, searching his face as if trying to measure the truth behind the words. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders lowering just a fraction. He set 2 mugs on the table, the steam rising between them. She sat opposite him, wrapping her hands around the cup for warmth. "You could hand me back," she said suddenly. "If you turn me in, they'd reward you. Maybe credits. Maybe a place higher than this." Elvis didn't look away. "I don't want higher. And I don't want them deciding what happens to you." Her throat worked as she swallowed. "Then what do you want?" He let the question hang, his gray eyes steady on hers. "Right now? For you to stop shaking when you talk about yourself. That would be enough." The words landed heavy. She blinked fast, her jaw tight, then looked down at her hands gripping the mug. Later, when she moved to the bunk, she didn't curl away from him like before. She pulled the blanket around her and lay on her side, facing the room, watching him. Elvis sat in the chair near the heater, his coat draped across his shoulders. He wrote a few notes on his slate, then set it aside and rubbed the tension from his neck. "Do you always sleep like that?" she asked softly. "Like what?" "Half awake. Like you're waiting for something to go wrong." He gave a faint shrug. "Old habit. Hard to drop." She hesitated, then pulled the blanket down just enough to speak without muffling her voice. "If you want the bed, take it. I've slept on floors before." He shook his head. "You need it more than I do." Her eyes lingered on him, narrowing slightly. "You don't make sense." "I'm not trying to," he said. She stared a moment longer, then turned on her back, the blanket rising and falling with her breath. The silence thickened, but it wasn't hostile. It was the silence of 2 people learning the edges of each other's presence. In the middle of the night, she stirred again. Elvis opened his eyes without moving. She sat on the bunk, blanket slipping to her waist, her silhouette faint in the dim light from the racks. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. "Bad dream?" he asked. She startled, then nodded, brushing at her face quickly as if to erase the evidence. Elvis stood, slow enough not to alarm her, and stepped closer. He stopped at the edge of the bunk, keeping a respectful distance. "Do you want me to leave you alone?" Her eyes flicked to him, uncertain. Then, with visible effort, she shook her head. He sat on the floor beside the bunk, leaning his back against the frame. Close enough for her to feel he was there, not so close it would trap her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Her breathing slowed, steadied, until she finally lay down again. Before her eyes closed, She whispered, "Thank you for not asking me for anything." Elvis looked straight ahead into the dim light, his voice low. "You don't owe me anything." Minutes later, her breath fell into the rhythm of sleep. He stayed there a while longer, listening, before letting his own eyes close. The next morning, the rain had slowed, leaving a gray wash over the lower lanes. Elvis finished his routine earlier than usual. Gauges logged, notes filed, tools packed. He set a plain tunic and a dark coat on the bunk. "You'll need these," he said. Arian eyed the clothes. "Why?" "Because today we're going upstairs." Her face tightened. "Up there? In the plazas?" He nodded once, calm as if it were just another survey check. "You said you can't hide in this room forever. If you want to see how they'll look at you, better to do it while I'm beside you." She hesitated. Her hands gripped the blanket, the memory of being thrown into the well flashing across her face. "And if they laugh? Or worse?" "Then they do," he said evenly, "but I'll still be there. They won't touch you." She looked at him a long moment, searching his face for cracks, for hesitation. She found none. Slowly, she pulled on the tunic and slid her arms into the coat. The fit wasn't perfect, but it gave her shape dignity the silks never had. She tied her braids back, her fingers shaking only once before steadying. When she stood, Elvis's eyes swept over her once, practical, assessing. Not as an elder would, not as a buyer would, but as a man making sure she could walk through a crowd without looking broken. She noticed the difference. It eased her shoulders, if only a little. The lift ride to the upper levels was silent, the hum of the platform vibrating under their feet. Elvis stood beside her, hands loose at his sides. Arian's eyes never left the glowing strip that marked the floor's edge. When the doors opened, light flooded in, too clean, too sterile. White tiles stretched across the plaza, glass towers gleamed, and people in pale fabrics moved with measured grace. The air smelled filtered, scrubbed to the dampness she had lived in. Arian's breath hitched, her body stiffening. Elvis moved first, stepping into the plaza without pause. He didn't look around, didn't check who watched. His stride was steady, his posture tall. After 2 beats, Arian followed, her steps uncertain at first, then firmer as she matched his pace. The stairs came quickly. A man glanced at her coat, then at her skin, then away. A woman whispered something to her companion, their eyes cutting sharp and curious. Arian felt the heat of it on her back, on her face. Her instinct screamed to lower her head, to disappear. But Elvis didn't slow. His presence beside her was solid, his expression unreadable. He didn't acknowledge the whispers, and by ignoring them, he pulled her into his calm. At the edge of the plaza, a row of fountains spilled water in perfect sheets. Arian stopped, staring at the display. Her reflection bent and broke across the glassy surface. "It's too clean," she muttered, almost bitter. "Looks nice," Elvis said, watching her instead of the water. "Doesn't mean it's better." A shop sat just beyond the fountain. Plain clothes for workers, practical and unadorned. Elvis led her inside. The shopkeeper's eyes flicked from him to her, then down to the counter. No words, no questions. Elvis pulled a fitted coat from the rack, checked the seams, then handed it to Arian. "Try it." She slipped it on. It hugged her shoulders, sat firm at her waist. For the first time, she didn't look like someone wearing scraps. She looked like she belonged to herself. "They'll still know," she whispered. "Let them," Elvis said. His voice was low, steady, carrying weight. Something in his tone struck her. She turned, close now, so close the air between them felt charged. Her eyes searched his, and before she could think better of it, she reached up, fingers brushing the back of his neck, and pulled him down. The kiss was quick but real, warm, insistent, more defiance than hesitation. When she pulled back, her lips trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. "Take me home," she said. Elvis's jaw tightened, not with resistance but with control. He nodded once, then guided her out of the shop. They walked back through the plaza together. The stairs hadn't stopped, but Arian's head stayed high this time. She held her coat close at the front, her chin level. No one tried to stop them. No one dared. By the time the lift doors closed behind them, Arian's pulse had steadied. She leaned against the wall, the new coat wrapped around her, her breath quick but not from fear. For the first time since the well, she felt like she was more than what they had left her to be. Elvis stood beside her, calm, silent, his presence anchoring her in the moment. And when the lift settled back into the lower lanes, she didn't hesitate. She stepped out at his side, not behind him. The door shut behind them with a muted click, sealing out the noise of the lanes. The unit felt warmer than usual, though the heater hadn't changed settings. Arian didn't sit right away. She stood in the center of the room, the new coat still wrapped around her, her braids falling forward as she looked at the floor. Elvis set his pack on the counter and hung his coat on its hook. His movements were steady, controlled, but his eyes stayed on her. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she gripped the fabric of her coat, as if letting go might undo everything she had gained today. "You walked through the plaza," he said. "You didn't fold. That was yours." Her head lifted slowly, amber eyes catching his. "It didn't feel like it until you stood there beside me." "I didn't make you do it," he said. "You chose." She took a breath, unfastened the coat, and set it carefully on the bunk. Underneath, the plain tunic clung to her form, simple but dignified. She stepped closer, her movements slow, deliberate. "You keep saying choice," she said. "But what if I choose wrong?" Elvis's jaw tightened. "Then we deal with it. Together." Her lips parted at that, a tremor in her breath. She raised her hand, brushed her fingers along his forearm, feeling the solid muscle under his sleeve. He didn't move, didn't take control, but his stillness carried weight, letting her set the pace. "I thought I was ruined," she whispered. "Thrown away. Filth." His gray eyes held hers. "I never saw filth. I saw someone fighting to stay alive." Her throat tightened. She leaned closer, her forehead brushing his chest, her fingers gripping the fabric of his shirt. For a long moment, she just breathed, her body trembling against him. Elvis lifted his hand slowly, resting on her back, steady and firm. She didn't pull away. When she tilted her face up, the look in her eyes carried both fear and need. He lowered his head, brushing his lips against hers, soft at first, giving her space to withdraw. She didn't. Her hand slid to the back of his neck, pulling him deeper. The kiss grew warmer, steadier, no hesitation this time. They moved together toward the bunk. Elvis lifted her, setting her down with care, his movements precise but unhurried. She pulled him closer, her hands gripping his shoulders, her legs brushing against his. Heat built between them, not rushed, but inevitable, years of control on his part balanced by the fragile hunger in her. When the tension broke, it wasn't violent or desperate. It was quiet, breath against skin, hands holding instead of taking. The tunic shifted loose, his shirt pulled aside, and they met skin to skin with nothing left between them but the choice to stay. She clung to him not out of fear, but out of trust, her body easing for the first time since he'd pulled her from the well. After, they didn't separate. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. He held her close, one hand sliding slowly through her braids, anchoring her in the silence. "Why me?" she whispered into the dark. "Because you were there," he said simply. "Because I couldn't walk away. Because now I don't want to." Her lips curved faintly against his skin, a tired but real smile. She pulled the blanket over them both, her body pressing into his like she belonged there. When morning came, she dressed in the coat he'd bought, tied the belt firm around her waist, and stood beside him as he checked the hydroponic trays. There was no hesitation in her movements now. She moved with him, not behind him, not hidden. At the door, she paused and looked back at the folded remnants of her ceremonial silks. "Keep them," she said quietly. "I want to remember that I lived." Elvis nodded, storing them in the container with the same care as before. They stepped into the corridor together. The lane smelled of damp stone and rust, the world unchanged. But the way Arian walked, head high, stride firm, made it clear everything had shifted. For Elvis, the weight of carrying someone had always meant loss. For the first time, it meant something else, a future. And when Arian slipped her hand into his as they moved toward the lift, she didn't let go. That was the end of it. No questions left hanging, no debt between them. Just two people choosing fully to walk forward together.